focus on what matters.
Welcome to our event on America's Manufacturing Renaissance. My name is Courtney Brown. I'm the markets reporter at Axios, and I'm coming to you from New York. Welcome to our audiences on Facebook, YouTube, LinkedIn, Twitter, and on Axios.com. Join the conversation today on Twitter with @Axios or using the hashtag Axios Events. Over the next 30 minutes, I'm going to be joined by my colleague, Hope King. We're going to be talking about how new technologies and an increased commitment to sustainability are setting a new standard for industrial manufacturing in America. Our first guest is the senator from Michigan, Senator Debbie Stabenow, who joins us now from Washington, D.C. It's good to see you, Senator.
Hi, Courtney. It's great to be with you. And thanks so much about talking about manufacturing. That is my passion.
Of course. Thank you for joining Axios. The first thing I wanted to ask you is about possibly the hottest, the sexiest topic right now, supply chains. This is a big deal for your state supply chains. Can you lay out for us how the manufacturing sector is grappling with the supply chain crisis that's been underway since the pandemic hit?
Sure. Well, first of all, we've had global supply chains. And so things are coming in from around the world to our auto plants as well as other kinds of facilities. And we do something called just in time. Rather than having a lot of inventory on site, you try to get the parts just in time for whatever you're doing. And so when you have a global pandemic, and the entire economy of the world, as well as our country, is shut down, you realize that it doesn't work if you're not making enough of those parts here in the United States. I mean, I've been saying this for a long time. We need to bring our jobs home so that we not only have the jobs, but we have the capacity, the resiliency to be able to make what we need from an economic and national defense standpoint. So one example of that is over half of what's semiconducting parts, these chips that go into every piece of electronics, that there are hundreds of them in your car, in appliances, and in everything, really. Those parts for automobiles have been made primarily in one place in Taiwan. Over 50% of the manufacturing chips made in one place in Taiwan. And that shut down with the pandemic. And so what has happened with that? Our folks have been scrambling now for over a year, and we are seeing plants shut down or shifts shut down because they can't complete making the automobile or the truck or the appliance and so on. And so I'm deeply involved in this from a number of ways right now. We have something called the CHIPS Act, which passed as part of an innovation bill here in the Senate that will help fund new facilities, what's called fabs, fabrication facilities, so that we're making those kind of chips here. And I'm also one of the authors of an investment tax credit that I believe will be in our Build Back Better plan that we're working on right now to incentivize 25% tax credit for these plants that will be able to make these semiconducting parts. And that's just one of so many different examples, whether it's manufacturing, food supply, medical supply, transportation, labor. I mean, we are seeing the supply chains of America in deep with deep problems because of the pandemic, and we are laser focused on addressing that.
You mentioned a bill you are working on that would incentivize building, chip facilities here in the U.S., but those facilities take years to be completed, if I'm not mistaken. So what are you hearing from manufacturers as far as what they need right now to get through the supply chain crisis?
Sure. It is an issue that it takes several years. Hopefully we get things up and going, get the CHIPS Act passed as part of the innovation bill. And, hopefully we can make that 2 years, not 5 or 6 or 7 years. But just this week, I was meeting in a roundtable in Michigan with the Secretary of Commerce and my Democrat colleagues in the Congress. And we met with auto suppliers. We met with representatives from the Big Three and with the UAW and others talking about what's happening for them right now. And, the Biden administration is all over this, and Secretary of Commerce doing a really great job of helping communications with other countries. I've also talked with Taiwanese ambassador, as well as the CEO of this company that has been doing the majority of the manufacturing of these chips in Taiwan. That folks are going to now bring one of the fabs to Arizona, but part of this right now is just identifying what's out there. There are other folks in other countries, other facilities that are making these semiconducting parts. And so the Department of Commerce is working very hard with the automakers on identifying what's out there. Transparency is really, really important. We're seeing a little bit of improvement happening, but we've got a long ways to go, because when you shut down this type of operation and then work on getting it up and going again, it's not like turning on a switch. These type of chips actually are part of what creates the safety in the automobile, for instance, like the batteries and so on. There's a lot of testing, a lot of safety testing and standards that have to be met to make these. And it just unfortunately takes time. So we're doing it, I'm doing everything I can to incentivize that we are making these parts and other things, other clean energy manufacturing technologies, other things that we can manufacture in the United States. And at the same time, we've got to figure out who else around the world can be suppliers in the meantime.
Senator, are you worried that the U.S. may overcompensate for the shortage that we're facing right now as far as chips are concerned? And years down the line, we may not be dealing with a chip shortage, but in fact, we'll be dealing with a glut. We'll have too many chips and not enough places to put them. Is that something that you're concerned about at all?
That thought honestly has never crossed my mind, because it would take a long time to get to that point. And if we did, we'd be happy to sell to others around the world. There will always be a market. And when we're looking from a national defense, 5G, manufacturing, communications, the type of technology we're talking about, and the various types of semiconductors, again, there are those that are used in manufacturing, which are different than those used in communications and other kinds of technology. And so I think we're only going to see more of those and a more variety of the technology, the semiconductors that are needed as we go forward to develop different kinds of equipment. And from my standpoint, first of all, I don't think we don't have an economy unless somebody makes something and somebody grows something, which is what we do in Michigan. But manufacturing, as it moves and changes and more advanced manufacturing and technology, is a very important part of our economy to be successful and to provide good paying jobs. It's also part of our national defense and is part of what is important for us in terms of leading the world. So if somewhere down the road, and I think it's a long ways down the road, we're making more semiconductors than we need, we certainly will have the opportunity to sell those around the world.
Before we let you go, Senator, can you tell us one thing you've learned this year about the supply chain that you didn't know before this year?
Well, first of all, I think what became very clear to me, and I've been worried about it, but it became very, very clear to me, is just how dependent we have been on operations around the globe and on parts that are critical for us. around the globe, and how we have not been focused on jobs in America and making sure that we can do what we need to do on a variety of fronts, not just in manufacturing. But I was deeply involved in the efforts to bring PPE, to bring all the medical equipment, the ventilators, the masks, the gowns to Michigan when we were one of the early states to be hit so hard in the pandemic. And it was shocking to see how ill prepared we were as a country to be able to meet just the basic medical equipment needs that we have. So this is a wake-up call for all of us. It's an opportunity for all of us, for states like mine that know how to make things and know how to innovate and create new technology. It's a real opportunity for jobs, but it's a wake-up call for us as a country that we need to be making things in America.
All right. Our thanks to Senator Stabenow for joining us today. It's good to see you, Senator. And thanks again so much for your time.
My pleasure. Thanks.
Thanks, Courtney. And thank you to our sponsor, SAFE, for making this conversation possible. Now joining us from Washington, D.C. is Executive Director, SAFE Commanding Heights, Dr. Jeb Nadner.
Good to be here. Thank you.
So let's dive right in. We're talking today about the future of manufacturing and SAFE's upcoming report, Stoking an Industrial Renaissance, Opportunities for U.S. Decision Makers. So it talks about an industrial renaissance, and based on the report insights, what does this renaissance mean across industries, and how does it promote growth?
There was a time not too long ago where the U.S. was a leading manufacturer in the world, and it generated a huge middle class in America. Over the last few decades, we've had successive waves of deindustrialization. The result is a hollowed out industrial sector, hollowed out middle class. And during COVID, we saw in particular that we did not produce many of the things that we need to counter the pandemic, that we need for our own health. And as leaders looked around, they could see that there are huge gaps in other areas: semiconductors, energy storage, basic wiring, electronics. We don't make in the US, the things that we depend on for a modern functioning society. So one of the issues we have today is, can we restore that manufacturing base? And the good news is that we have the technology, we have the people. It's a question of having the right policies and the right incentives by the US government to make a favorable business climate for industry to want to build those fabrication plants in the US once again.
Now, a big part of the discussion is anchored in both national and local policy discussions. So from your perspective, how can we create a bipartisan consensus to support clean production in heavy industry?
Despite all the news about partisan dissension, you can see over the last few years, there's actually a fair amount of bipartisan action to address this deficit in the US economy. You can see this with the Telecommunications Act of around a year ago, the CHIPS Act of last year, the CHIPS Action of this year, the bipartisan infrastructure bill. You can see that members from both sides of the aisle are looking around and say, we need more capacity in the US, in key high technology areas. We cannot just be an R&D firm for the world. We actually need to produce some of these products in the United States. And you can see people like Senator Warner from Virginia, Democrat, Senator Cornyn from Texas, Senator Cotton from Arkansas, Senator Rubio, Senator Reid from Rhode Island, different parties, different factions within their own parties coming together to make some solutions for the US. There are some Republicans, they have a visceral reaction about electric vehicles. You have other Republicans that note a lot of the electric vehicle factories and battery factories are going up in so-called red states. There are Democrats that the idea of a factory, they think about 1968, smokestack industries. We are in 2021. We are now many decades into the ecology revolution. We know how to do things cleanly. We know how to do things with low carbon emissions. So a factory can mean producing things in the finest way in the world and also a lot of jobs here in the US.
Now, sustainability will continue to be at the forefront of these discussions next year, especially after the U.S. reinforced our commitment to emissions reduction at COP26. the United Nations Climate Change Conference. What role do factories play in building a climate resilient future?
Well, a clean factory in the United States that makes steel or aluminum or semiconductor chips, okay, has a net zero effect on carbon emissions, which is what we want. However, if we outsource production to someplace like China, it's a very different story. We're talking about some of the worst environmental records in the world, poor labor practices, huge carbon emissions. So outsourcing the goods that we buy to places like China, as opposed to places that make things clean, like the Asian Maritime Rim, North America, Europe, Mexico, that's a huge mistake. It's one planet, one environment. The emissions in China affect all of us. So there's all the more reason to make things here and with our friends.
Now, in the context of these policy conversations, we're hearing more about an impetus on driving a Made in America approach, supporting job growth in our own backyard. Does this mean that our country is approaching things in a way that we're manufacturing things by itself? Where do you think global players would play a role?
We very much believe in free trade. The issue is competing with countries that don't abide by free trade. This is not America alone. This is America with its friends and allies. We're talking about creating more diversity in our supply chains and reducing dependence, particularly on one country. So we certainly need to make a lot more in the United States. We have a huge deficit. We need to overcome that, and we can. But we want to do so with allies. And you can see recently some of the U.S. moves with the EU. We're beginning to patch up some of our trade differences in light of the understanding that we need more capacity rather than shipping jobs and factories off to China.
Now, to close us out, there's a lot of skepticism that America can gain its former manufacturing edge. Where do you think we're currently headed?
I think there is a lot of skepticism in the United States because we have several decades of deindustrialization. But let's look at the reality. We have 350 million Americans. We have some of the best talent in the world, okay? We have the best R&D in the world. Many of the products that are made in China and the rest of the world, they're invented here. We've got the most dynamic economy. So if we can get the right incentives and we get the right tax policies and the right investments, there's really nothing the United States cannot do. We've done it repeatedly in the past. So to regain our manufacturing edge, that is something well within our national capability.
Well, it's been an absolute pleasure. I'd like to thank Dr. Jeb Nadner for joining us here at Axios.
Thank you very much. Pleasure.
Now back to my colleague, Hope King.
I'm Hope King, business reporter for Axios. Our final guest is the president and CEO of Siemens USA, Barbara Humpton. She's joining us from Washington, D.C. Hello, Barbara.
Hi, Hope. Great to be with you.
Great to have you here on this week, where we've seen a lot of news around more of these supply chain issues. The president holding another roundtable discussion with retailers on the same day that the FTC launched a study into the issues as well. I wonder, though, aren't these efforts coming in a little too late in the game?
It's never too late to get started. The supply chain obviously is a critical issue for all of us. And from the first disruptions we saw due to COVID to all of the really crazy things that happened in 2021, supply chain has really risen as the issue right now for our economies all around the world.
So I think what's really notable is that we've seen these issues delay our packages. We've seen a lot of these out of stock messages this year continuing to grow in terms of the frequency that we see them online. But at the same time, companies are doing pretty well. Profit margins, for example, for these companies are the largest they've been since 1950, if you discount sort of banks. That's according to a Bloomberg analysis. Doesn't that say that sort of these problems really aren't problems?
Well, actually, the problems are real, and the flow of goods has really been disrupted over the last year and a half. But what we are seeing is a lot of ingenuity coming into play. And for instance, we at Siemens have been using a variety of tools, analytics, the sheer grit and determination of our supply chain experts who have been assuring that we've been able to keep our operations going and really producing at levels that are optimized based on the supplies that are available to us. So this is the kind of adaptive quality of the businesses that we're running today.
I think that's really the point, right? Is that the results speak for themselves. I mean, companies clearly have been able to manage through some of these issues and maybe some of these tools that you're talking about. If you could go into some of the details of how they actually have still, again, helped companies create such nice profit margins for themselves. And, for the most part, people are still getting what they want. And if it's something that they, not exactly what they want, there is a substitution that they might be able to find.
Yeah, there are several things that companies are focused on right now. Before the pandemic, we always were focused on just-in-time inventories. And we've recognized that we really have to treat inventory management differently. So that adaptation has happened. And what we're doing now actually is accelerating the digitalization of our operations. What we're doing is finding ways to use data in unprecedented ways so that now we have more knowledge of what's the true demand for the products we produce, what are the supply levels that will be needed to really fulfill the orders that have been placed with us. And today, it's this ability to combine the digital and the physical worlds that really gives us the power to respond.
I wonder if this is sort of the digital twin technology that Siemens has been experimenting with and developing.
Yeah, actually, Hope, that's a great question because I think a really great example is the way we've responded through the pandemic, working with not only pharmaceutical companies, but also with the FDA. So a great example is BioNTech. As they ramped up production of the mRNA vaccine production in Germany, they needed the help of Siemens to sort of compress the timelines for getting ready. What they used was a digital twin of their production facility. And then the Siemens technology experts, coupled with the experts in the pharmaceutical production line, were able to stand up a production line in 5 months versus the anticipated year it might have taken. And now the FDA is working with Siemens to use the digital twin technology, this digital virtual version of what will ultimately be the physical supply production line, and using that digital twin for some of the early review and validation processes. It's going to take time out of very long processes that would typically delay production. Now we can get to market faster with the things that the public needs.
So it's really a model in the digital form of these production lines. You can experiment, you can try out things before you launch them physically, and that saves time. Is that sort of what I'm hearing?
That's exactly right, Hope. And the idea is that instead of wasting time building something, an inspector come check it, paperwork about how this already built physical object is performing, we can now use the virtual version of that to check out early and see, would this satisfy the requirements? If it doesn't, it's a lot faster to make changes before we've begun to build the actual physical production line.
What are some other trends that you're seeing? Before we started the conversation here, we were talking about reshoring, and now there's a term friendshoring, and we know about onshoring and bringing some of these jobs and facilities back.
Yeah, we've heard Secretary Raimondo talk very recently just about the importance of locating our supplies, our critical supplies, where we can be assured of delivery. And so this term friendshoring, making sure that for instance, semiconductors are produced by countries who are going to work collaboratively with us. This is a matter of national security now. The way we've been talking about this at Siemens is globalization. We really can be tapped into global innovation networks, but we can be really manifesting local, regional supply chains so that we can have production taking place close to the point of need.
And the reason for that also, I think, from what I've heard from a lot of advocates, is that you also create jobs. And we know how important that is in this economy right now. One question that we have from our audience that I want to share with you, the question reads this. So we're in the process now of shifting our economy from being dependent on oil and gas to more of a green economy. How do you see the current domestic regulatory agenda impacting, though, our current ability to increase domestic production?
Yeah, I think we need to be aware that this decade of action for climate change is also going to be a decade of transition. I know there are plenty of advocates who'd love to see us make an immediate switch to all renewable energy. But let's face it, we're going to be in a decade when we need to be transitioning from fossil fuels to other alternatives. And so while we're working our way through that transition, we can find lots of greener, more effective, more efficient sources of fuel, more efficient and ways to use clean natural gas, for instance, in order to support our industries. Now, we have lots of innovation going on. This week, I'll be taking the first flight with United Airlines sustainable aviation fuel. The Eco Skies Alliance is investing in this kind of innovation. And so what we'll see during this decade of transition is one where many, many new solutions come to the front, and innovators will be there to put them to work.
I know Siemens also has recently announced new initiatives to track just where carbon footprints are expanding or are shrinking in the supply chain. Can you tell me about that?
Yeah, I'm so glad you asked about this because just last week we announced the Sea Green product. This is data about data about the carbon footprint of products as they're being produced. So as we look into our supply chain, we can understand these materials that we're using. What was used to produce them? What's their carbon impact? And by doing that, we give supply chain experts and producers in every field more power to make choices. They can be selecting supplies based on their price, their availability, the overall schedules for their production, and now their carbon footprint. And I think what we are seeing in basically all the fields we're working in is that more and more customers are demanding that kind of insight and control so they can make good on the commitments that they're making for decarbonization.
And I think lastly, just to look forward into the next couple of years, we know that labor supply was under pressure this year. And I wonder how many companies are now turning to automation to prevent any of those issues from getting in the way of supply chain, down the line. And if that also means then loss of jobs as well.
Yeah, I don't see this as a loss of jobs. What we've experienced in our own operations is that indeed we do need people in order to produce the products and to provide the services that we do all across the country and around the world. And what we're finding is that automation is a way for us to actually elevate the role that the humans play in the work there is to be done. So right now you see absolutely job openings all across this economy. Technology can be a great answer to help make us all more productive so that every one of us who gets back to work is actually capable of producing more.
All right, Barbara, thank you so much for joining us here on Axios.
Thanks, Hope.
Thank you all for joining this afternoon for another virtual conversation that has made everyone smarter, faster. For more information or to sign up for the Axios Closer newsletter, visit axios.com/newsletters or on the Axios app. Thank you all for joining, and we'll see you on axios.com.